Welcome to The Explainer. If you've been tracking the headlines lately, you know India's agricultural system is sitting at a really tricky crossroads right now, in May 2026. We are literally seeing massive contradictions between what's happening up in the sky, what's being written on paper in government offices, and what farmers are actually dealing with down on the ground. So, we're going to unpack this giant agricultural paradox today.
Here is our agenda for this breakdown. 1. The climate and market paradox. 2. Mapping regional hotspots. 3. Crop and input intelligence. 4. Policy versus ground reality. 5. Farmer impact and outlook. And finally, 6. Actionable insights.
Okay, let's dive into Section 1, the climate and market paradox. So the Indian Meteorological Department, the IMD, is sticking to its forecast of a below-normal southwest monsoon, basically driven by a developing El Niño. They're projecting it at about 92% of the long-period average, which is just the historical baseline for expected rainfall. But here is the crazy part. Nationally, May rainfall is actually tracking at roughly 110% of normal. But if you zoom in on northwest India, they are facing a severe 73% deficit. We're looking at a completely split pattern right now, a moisture-rich south and a parched, heat-wave-stricken northwest. And this extreme weather divide, it's crashing headfirst into a really weird market anomaly. We call this the minimum support price, or MSP, execution gap. See, on paper, the Union Cabinet just approved higher MSPs for 14 Kharif crops for the 2026-27 season. We're talking sharp, solid increases for things like sunflower seed, cotton, and pulses. But out in the actual markets, the local mandis, these officially raised government prices just aren't translating. We're seeing a massive execution gap where crops like wheat and pulses are trading well below their newly raised support levels.
Let's move on to Section 2, Mapping Regional Hotspots.
This breakdown paints the picture perfectly. Up in the northwest, places like Punjab, Haryana, Rajasthan, farmers are battling severe heat waves and massive moisture deficits. It's incredibly dry. But down south and in the northeast, it's the exact opposite. They are getting heavy to very heavy pre-monsoon rains. And while you'd think that's great for building up moisture reserves, it's simultaneously spiking the risk for diseases like fungal and bacterial leaf spots. Meanwhile, central India is dealing with its own heat waves, which is driving up evaporative demand and creating huge early sowing risks for crops like cotton and soybean if farmers plant too early on scant showers.
Which naturally brings us to a huge question. With all this geographical asymmetry going on, what does it actually mean for the sowing window right now?
Let's find out in Section 3, Crop and Input Intelligence. Now, what's really interesting about this matrix is how it breaks down the reality for 4 major crop groups. Take wheat. Average mandi prices are sitting at about 2,450 to 2,475 rupees per quintal, that's per 100 kilos, which is actually below the effective MSP. Pulses are in the exact same boat, trading at discounts to the MSP despite massive policy rhetoric saying otherwise. Cotton, though, is a slightly brighter spot. Domestic mandi prices are tracking a still elevated global cotton complex, so that's offering some relatively favorable profitability. And then there's sugarcane. Sugarcane has a really strong government-backed income floor, but it carries a massive medium-term weather risk if that below-normal monsoon tightens water availability later in the season.
Let's zoom in on pulses for a second, because the price signals here are pretty wild. Despite a huge expansion in summer pulse acreage and these massive government procurement promises, the market is completely subdued. Tur is trading roughly 8% below the MSP, Chana is down 10%, and Masoor is down about 4%. There's ample supply, but miller demand is low, and the on-ground procurement just isn't absorbing the surplus fast enough. And right alongside those squeezed crop prices, we have a major paradox in input economics. Check this out. India's retail tractor sales just crossed 10.5 lakh units in FY26. That is an 18.9% year-over-year growth. It shows incredible rural investment appetite. But, and it's a big but, that high capital expenditure is clashing directly with surging global crude prices and persistently high diesel rates. For farmers in the heatwave-stricken northwest and central belts, this translates instantly into way higher per-acre irrigation costs, literally just to pump water for pre-monsoon land prep.
All right, Section 4, Policy versus Ground Reality. I want you to anchor your attention on this number, 365 rupees per quintal. That is the new fair and remunerative price, or FRP, set for sugarcane for the 2026-27 season. On paper, this is fantastic news for growers in states like UP, Maharashtra, and Karnataka. It sets an incredibly strong income floor. The policy intent here is crystal clear: support farmer incomes.
But contrast that strong intent with this number, 15.3 lakh tons. That is the exceptionally sluggish government wheat procurement so far in the 2026-27 season. It is very low compared to normal. So while you have these high support prices announced in press releases, weak execution on actual procurement means that yield risk has already turned into real income risk for wheat growers, forcing them to sell below MSP in local markets.
It's like these two massive policy interventions are pulling in completely opposite directions. On one side, sugar exports have been strictly banned until at least September 30th, 2026. Now, this secures domestic availability and keeps consumer inflation in check, sure, but it completely caps the financial upside for sugar mills. On the flip side, the government has promised 100% procurement of key pulses up to 2028-29, but as we just saw, that promise remains totally patchy on the ground. Policy is simultaneously trying to boost production for farmers while suppressing prices for consumers, and it's creating some incredible friction in the system. So the crucial point is, what does this actually mean for the people on the ground? Section 5, Farmer Impact and Outlook. You know the twin pressures of sub-MSP prices and rising fuel costs? They absolutely do not impact everyone equally. Smallholders, especially out in the rain-fed belts, are facing an immediate, severe cash squeeze. They simply do not have the financial buffer to delay sowing or wait out bad market prices. The high cost of diesel hits their cash cycles today. Large, better capitalized farmers, on the other hand, are pretty insulated. They can hedge their bets, they stagger their sowing, they heavily diversify their crop mix between cotton, soybean, and paddy, and they can afford to just hold their stock in a warehouse to sell later when prices inevitably bounce back. If we map out the strategic outlook for the next 8 weeks or so, the timeline is seriously tight. Right now, we're in the late May base case monsoon onset phase. If things progress smoothly, those early care of sowing windows will open up in June across Maharashtra, MP, and Karnataka. But the massive threat looming over this whole timeline is July and August. That is when the El Niño-driven below-normal monsoon forecast poses the absolute highest risk of a mid-season dry spell. Okay, let's wrap this up with Section 6, Actionable Insights. Here's the region's specific playbook, pulled straight from the data. Number 1, up in the northwest irrigated belt, farmers absolutely must delay paddy transplanting. It is much smarter to wait for a clearer monsoon onset rather than wasting extremely expensive, diesel-pumped water during this heat wave. Number 2, in central rain-fed belts, agronomists are advising a tiered crop mix. Keep part of your area under climate-resilient millets and pulses, and cautiously allocate cotton only on better soils that actually have irrigation backup. And number 3, in the south, exploit that heavy moisture, for sure. But you have to strictly scout for diseases like blast and leaf blight, and definitely avoid excessive nitrogen, because that just fuels those exact issues. And for the policymakers and agri-tech folks tuning into this explainer, the mandate is pretty clear. We need to deploy district-level heat dashboards that link the IMD's forecasts directly to recommended sowing windows. And crucially, there has to be active, boots-on-the-ground support for pulses procurement logistics, things like aggregation points, rapid quality testing, and digital records. That execution gap between the high MSP announcements and what the farmer actually takes home, it has to be closed if we want to stabilize farmer confidence. Which leaves us with one final, really vital question to ponder. The whole policy system is structurally pushing a massive diversification away from rice and wheat and toward pulses, oilseeds, and millets. But right now, execution gaps are keeping prices low, and farmers are locking into high-cost cultivation packages exactly as a projected 92% below normal monsoon approaches. So will this big push for crop diversification actually survive the season? The hidden risks are definitely building up in the system, and it's a dynamic we're going to continue to watch very closely. Thank you for joining me for this